that people are doing. So, the Find X7 Ultra, it's been a pleasure to use, but the new one's out, the Find X8 Pro. I've ordered it, it's gonna be here soon, so just be a little patient and we're gonna have some juicy camera comparisons to say the least. However, this time, let's just say that the Find X7 Ultra is going out with a bang because we are putting it up against the Vivo X100 Ultra. Now this thing's a little crazy, let's face it. It's got basically every feature under the sun. It does have some weird, awkward issues that should not exist, that make no sense, for sure. But, well, that's just the way things are, nothing is perfect. However, this is going to be an interesting one to say the very least, so let's jump in. Alright, so we're jumping in with the main camera. So here's the deal, look, I kind of forgot to take the samples for the vivid colors and the textured mode options. All of these are nice natural colors. Look, I get it. At this point you should know, if you have any interest in the Vivo X100 Ultra or any of the Vivo flagships that we have had over the ages, you probably know about all the different color options that we get. And without a singular doubt in my mind, I've always chosen the nice natural colors, so it kind of works out, I guess. Sorry I forgot. But regardless, here's the deal. Even though on the X100 Ultra I did kind of tweak the settings to have a little bit more contrast, a little bit less sharpening, the Oppo still goes very heavy on the contrast, which most of the time looks beautiful. As you can probably tell, it looks stunning. But there are also times when it doesn't work out. Here's the deal. When you have a particular style, there are going to be instances when they don't work out or they don't look nice. It's gonna happen, regardless of how beautifully or perfectly, well, allegedly perfectly tuned it may be. That's just the way it goes. So at this point, I just accept inconsistencies for what they are, unless there's a genuine issue that repeats itself over and over, and there are genuine issues, we'll get to that. Sometimes having a little bit too much contrast, a little bit too little contrast with either of these devices is gonna happen. This is natural way of things. So really nothing much to be bothered with, so to speak, because that's just the way things work. But I do have a little bit of an issue because you see, so that's natural colors. As the name would indicate, it's not supposed to give you any kind of unnatural or overly saturated colors. It's in the name, right? But, well, I took these shots. There was still plenty of light. I wouldn't say plenty of light, but enough light to take regular shots and not night mode shots. But the sun had basically set, as you can probably tell. And the sky came out looking ludicrous on the X100 Ultra, which is not a good sign, now is it? But that's not all. There is one other area where the X100 Ultra can falter a fair bit, and it's with dynamic range, of all things. This has never made any sense to me whatsoever because Vivo, traditionally, every single flagship I've used over the years, ever since the X50 Pro, if I'm not wrong, yeah, that's the one. Ever since that phone, they have had some of the best dynamic range in their respective generations in their respective years. That's not the case this time around for some very odd reason. Hell, the X100 Pro, this one's younger brethren, so to speak, it had better dynamic range as opposed to the X100 Ultra, which makes no sense whatsoever, but that's just the way it is, and it's not been fixed for some very odd reason. Now before we go any further, I got something special for you. This is near and dear to my heart because, as you may have noticed over the years if you have been following my channel, I love taking B-roll. It's one of my favorite parts about making YouTube videos is taking B-roll, capturing product videos and just showcasing them in the best bloody possible manner. And it brings me a lot of joy, without question. Now this year itself, I actually started using the iPhone for a lot of B-roll. And if you hadn't noticed in any of my reviews or complete comparisons, well then, fantastic, that's exactly the way I want it to be. You should not really be able to tell the difference between this camera and the iPhone. That's the beauty of it. So here's where Sandmarc comes in, because you see, I've always wanted to experiment with some of the other lenses, especially with macro lenses. Now, you might know this, but the macro photography or macro videography on the iPhone is very limited because it's only capable of using the ultra-wide camera. So that's where Sandmarc comes in, because they provided me not only with the macro lens, which yes, you can fit it on the main camera and you can utilize the full quality that the iPhone has to offer. They also provided me with a polarizer, which is just such a godsend. Like, one of the issues that I face a lot with the iPhone in particular is screen flickering and color banding when I'm trying to take the shot of a screen. Any phone, for that matter. And that issue can be pretty much solved with a polarizer. Now, I never really invested in one, but I was planning on it, so I'm really happy that the timing was so bloody fortunate that Sandmarc reached out. And I can tell you right now, my B-roll game is gonna be through the roof, especially with the macro lens and this insane polarizer combined. It's just gonna be perfect, exactly what I want. I can tell you this much. If you are interested in videography or photography, I mean, macro photography is big. And this macro lens is one of the absolute highest quality that I've ever seen. They also come with a case, which can make it so much easier to just utilize. All you have to do is screw it on and it's immensely high quality. I'm telling you, I did not expect it to be as nice. If you don't want to use the case, you also get clips. And overall, it's a good product. You see, I have a very strict policy. I only recommend products that work out well for me. I wouldn't do this if it was otherwise, which is why I'm recommending this, because it works so well for anyone who is interested in content creation. If you want to jump in with the iPhone, that's the best way to start, to be entirely honest. This was not the case. This was not a possibility just a few years ago. Now you have the opportunity to get started on something, see if it works out. And well, if you want to up your game, this is the way to go. Check out Sandmarc, links in the description, and if I hopefully don't forget, I'll pin the comment as well. And at this point, as you can probably tell, it is exactly the same situation with the ultra-wide camera as well. There's basically no realistic difference between the two in terms of how they perform and what you should or shouldn't expect from these devices. It just works out just as well across the board, or just as bad. Depends on your perspective. If you don't like how the Oppo looks, or if you don't like how the X100 looks, well then that's your personal choice. But the issues, they kind of remain, especially with the X100 Ultra and the way it's somehow not able to handle the twilight time, I guess. But the dynamic range, I see that one somehow just switches around, which makes no sense to me, because the ultra-wide camera, it's always supposed to be low quality as opposed to the main camera. So why is the main camera's dynamic range not good enough? It should without a doubt be better, but in this case, as you can tell, the X100 Ultra's dynamic range with the main camera is definitively worse than the ultrawide, but the ultrawide is also better than what the Oppo can produce, like significantly better as opposed to what the Oppo can produce. So if the processing is capable of handling things so well, why doesn't it translate to the main camera, which is the most important camera on any smartphone, no matter which one you choose? And now we have got the macro photography. So these are with the ultra-wide cameras, and unfortunately, you'll find out soon enough that the Find X7 Ultra can't really do anything else outside of this. Now, look, I'm not against ultra-wide macro photography, but there is something better. At least in my opinion, it is significantly better. And I'm obviously talking about telephoto macro. This thing is miraculously good, especially on the X100 Ultra. It is by far the best macro capability that I've seen. And yeah, the Find X7 Ultra can kind of use its 3x camera, but it's not really taking a macro shot at this point. But maybe you're wondering, what if we use sensor crop on both? Well, yeah, sensor crop does work out on the X100 Ultra. It is specifically built for macro photography with sensor crop. That's what gives you this ludicrous close-up. I mean, just take a look at that. And moving on, of course, we have the zoom test. Now, here's the deal. I think that the X100 Ultra is maybe a little too desaturated. In this particular case, it doesn't look quite as nice as it should have, because blues were not as desaturated as they look on the X100. But then, of course, the whole point of sensor crop is to see how much detail it can preserve. So let's crop all the way in, and as you can tell, yes, there is definitely more sharpening and processing on the X100, but it is also producing significantly more detail as opposed to the Find X7 Ultra. I guess to an extent, it does depend on what approach you prefer, but at the end of the day, I feel like most might prefer the X100 Ultra despite the slightly higher processing, because remember, this is a 500% crop, so overall, the details are going to be more valuable at this point. And then of course, we have 3x on the Oppo and 3.7x on the Vivo, and once again, like, take a look at the contrast. I really like what the Find X7 Ultra does in like 95% of the cases with the contrast. It is maintained beautifully. I think it's gotten even better as time has gone on and as Oppo has updated their stuff. Vivo, on the other hand, it's good most of the time, but sometimes, like in this case, as you can tell, the contrast is severely lacking. But then of course, 6x. Now you see, the Find X7 Ultra, it has a really good telephoto camera. But as you may have guessed, if you know anything about the X100 Ultra, you know that its telephoto, I think it's the best that we have ever had on any smartphone thus far. And cropping into 500%, you can see, even as opposed to the Find X7 Ultra, which does have a fantastic telephoto camera, and it kind of prides itself on its 6x sensor crop zoomed in shot that it gives us, the X100, it takes the lead by a long shot. But here's what kind of surprised me. When I took this, I think it's a 30x shot that I took, and Both are looking very nice. Yeah, I do see more processing and sharpening on the Find X7 Ultra, but it's not really that big a difference. It honestly looks fantastic on both. So yes, I guess to an extent the subject does determine what kind of shot you're gonna get, and in this case, maybe because there's a lot of clear lines and not a lot of fine details to enhance, both are performing really well. But if you do want finer details, well then the Find X7 Ultra is not gonna be the one for you. Now moving on over to main camera high-res. So here's the deal. Yes, the Oppo might appear to be severely underexposed, and it is, to be fair, but there is a different problem on the X100 Ultra. And as you can tell, when we crop into 500%, it didn't focus. I used tap to focus. It even showed that yellow icon that showcases that yes, it is focusing. And if it's not focused, it usually tells me that you need to step back or move further along or something like that, something along those lines. I got nothing of the sort, no such warnings. It basically confirmed that it focused, and then it did not focus, which is, this is just a bad prank at this point. And yeah, I get it, I guess I should have checked and should have taken another one at that point, but, well, I expected Vivo to do the jobs. Don't blame me, blame the X100 Ultra. Anyways, let's move on to the ultra-wide camera, and this time, it did focus. So let's zoom on it. And to be fair, there's really not a lot of difference. This is a 500% crop, and yes, even with high-res, I don't think there's a lot going on. The color difference is more obvious than anything else. The Find X7 Ultra is the one with the natural looking colors. The X100 is going a little overboard. I think it's in part got to do with the fact that you can't really use any of the color profiles like Zeiss's natural colors when you're taking high-res, which is almost an oversight at this point. We should be able to use that stuff, but we don't. Moving right along to 3x or 3.7x on the X100 Ultra to be very precise. Yeah, look, here's the deal. I think at this point you know for a fact that the X100 Ultra is going to take the win. The one thing that the Oppo is doing better is handling the dynamic range. It's precisely why I framed it like this, so that we could showcase the dynamic range situation and the fact that the X100 Ultra doesn't always come out on top, especially in that regard. But let's be honest, even with 50 megapixels, which is a binned down version of the 200 megapixels that it is capable of, yeah, the X100 is most definitely doing a much better job. And then of course we have the 200 megapixels. Now it doesn't really make a whole bunch of difference in terms of how the image turns out, but upon zooming in, I'm sure you can tell. This is by far the only camera that I've ever used which showcases a proper difference between the 50 megapixel bin down mode and the full-blown 200 megapixels. I can without question tell that there's less sharpening going on, there's less processing, there's more realistic detail and sharpness being brought out. Not sharpening as in the processing of sharpening, but rather actual proper organic sharpness that we have. Anyways, now let us check out selfies. Now here's the deal. Most of the time, it's gonna turn out really good on both because, well, these phones are flagships, and at this point, selfies, portraits, those are the kind of things that are much better tuned. At least that's what you expect. But here's the deal. Take a look at my nose. The very tip of it. Why is that blown out on the X100 Ultra? I'm genuinely asking, it makes no sense. The sun wasn't even falling on me, so why is it blown out? Now this is particularly weird because in this case, particularly, we have is the X100 Ultra giving us better dynamic range as opposed to the Find X7 Ultra, which is completely opposite of what we saw previously. This is an even more challenging situation, but it's doing better. So why was my nose blown out? I guess we'll never know. Regardless, this one even more challenging as opposed to the previous, and it's still performing valiantly. To be entirely honest, it's a really good shot. It's better, more detailed as opposed to the Find X7 Ultra, and I think the only thing I like about the Find X7 is that it has a much wider field of view, which I personally prefer a lot. And then of course, we've got the selfie portraits. Now, in selfie portraits, I think both of them once again turn out really nice. I still see some blown out spots on my nose. It's not as bad as the selfie, but I don't know why this happens. It makes no sense. But personally, I couldn't care less because I never take selfies outside of camera comparisons, but why is such an issue even existing on a flagship of this caliber, supposedly? But then oddly enough, in this case, it's looking a lot better. It's maybe a little too red with my skin tones, and that doesn't look quite as nice. I think the skin tones on the Find X1 Ultra look a lot better, in this case at least. And once again, when you do have a genuinely difficult dynamic range situation, it performs perfectly, exactly how you'd expect. If anything at all, the detail preservation on the X100 Ultra is a little bit better as opposed to the Find X7 Ultra. Even though, yes, I get it, the angle isn't quite exactly the same. And then of course we have night selfies. Now here's something that I found out. The nighttime in Dubai is not exactly all that dark. Like, you might not even need night selfies or night mode, to be completely honest. It'll help, obviously, it'll produce better images, but most of the time you won't really see a lot of difference. Like in this case, yeah, it looks a little washed out on the Find X7 Ultra, but the detail preservation, given the fact that neither of these phones are very good with night photos, trust me, I know, is still looking really nice and really usable. So yeah, I guess if you have enough light, you can get good night selfies, but yeah, don't expect particularly anything at all from these phones, especially if you're interested in really dark night selfies. And then moving back to the rear cameras, this time with portraits. I don't know what's happening on the X100 Ultra. It lets me like speechless for a moment right there. Because, yeah, look, I get it. The Find X7 Ultra is going for a very natural approach to the point that it's kind of darkening my face a little too much. I would have preferred a little bit more brightness, but still, why do I look that washed out on the X100 Ultra? This does not look good. This does not look like a portrait shot from the X100 Ultra. Is really not good enough. But then, just like with the bloody selfies, for some reason, when you have a genuinely, obscenely difficult situation like a backlit portrait like this one, like there's literally the sun back there, as you can tell, the Find X is struggling a lot. The X100 Ultra is producing a perfect shot. I don't think it could have been any better than this. Like, there's minimum amount of flaring, there's perfect amount of detail, and it doesn't look like my face is a cutout. It looks good on the X100 Ultra. So my question is, why the inconsistency? But of course, we also have a whole bunch of focal lengths on both, but it's even more on the X100 Ultra because for some reason the Find X7 Ultra cannot do 35mm. And this time actually the Find X is going just batshit crazy with the skin tones. I don't even know what's going on over there. But then of course we have 2x. Now, I'm not sure what happened, but there's a lot of face and skin brightening happening on the X100 Ultra. This was really not the case in just the previous photography comparison I did. I know I did that a while back. Maybe an update changed something about the X100 Ultra, but I don't know. I feel like it was a little bit better, a little bit more consistent as opposed to what we had previously. Now, the Find X7 Ultra isn't perfect. It also has its issues. You know, it's a little too dark in some of the shadows, and the skin tone isn't looking quite as appealing and as natural as it should be. But yeah, I'm surprised by the X100 Ultra here. Then of course, 3x telephoto portraits, or 3.7x on the X100 Ultra, as many people like to correct me. But here's the thing, look, I love the stylish way that the X100 Ultra handles its portraits. I love the swirling Zeiss bokeh that it does. I think it's called Biotar bokeh. Sometimes it can go a little overboard. That's what I'm trying to get at here. The Find X7 Ultra, as you can tell, is maintaining a very natural approach, really nice skin tones on both, to be fair. But the bokeh on the X100 Ultra, especially with the VAS in front, it looks a little tacky. And of course, 100mm on the X100 Ultra. This is kind of like a sensor crop on the X100, but the Find X1 Ultra also gives you 6x with a sensor crop, which is fantastic because you can get some really nice looking shots with such a large focal length. You can essentially have flattering portraits, and if you're a photographer or know anything about photography, you know exactly why this is such a good thing to have. And then finally, night mode portraits. Now, as it turns out, I thought it was dark, but it wasn't dark enough. Not at least to challenge either of these phones because they're producing perfect shots. The Find X7 Ultra kind of looks like it's a nighttime portrait, but you can't even tell with the X100 Ultra. It is so bright. Especially like, look at the wall in the background. That's supposed to be dark. And it's not. Not in the slightest. Now then, let us move on to night mode. So, here's the deal. With both of these phones, especially with the main and even to an extent with the ultra-wide camera, you'll see soon enough that you're not really gonna see any real proper differences between the two. There's going to be stylistic differences, there's going to be differences in the way colors and contrast is handled, but the quality, the raw quality is going to be stunning on both. That's just the way it works. That's not to say that it's always going to turn out perfect. There are going to be instances when, let's say, the Oppo doesn't really produce as much detail as you might like. Other instances might be that the X100 Ultra has way too blue of a night sky. That's an actual problem at this point. Like, it really needs a natural color profile for its night mode. Weird thing, like, why do we not get Zeiss natural colors on the night mode? That makes no sense, right? And there may even be instances when the X100 Ultra just gives you way too much saturation. Once again, why do we not get Zeiss natural colors with the night mode? It could be really worthwhile having Zeiss natural colors, wouldn't it? But we don't. And then with the ultra wide camera, the one thing that I'm noticing more than anything else is that the Oppo really likes to darken the shadows, whether it's a night sky or the shadows in general in the scene itself. Is very obvious. Even some of the highlights seem to be more blown out as opposed to the X100 Ultra. But here's the thing. Both phones will turn out really nice images. The Oppo will be more natural, however. That is the most important thing to bear in mind. As compared to the X100 Ultra, with night mode specifically, the Oppo does seem to have kind of an edge because more natural colors is just better in most cases. And that very aspect, that difference in the way photos are fundamentally processed, is more than evident in most of these images, especially with the ultra-wide camera. But the main camera was actually much closer on both. But with the ultra-wide, the Oppo really leans into the natural, dark shadows, nighttime looking shots, as opposed to the X100, which it's not bad, not by a long shot, but it still is not quite as natural as the Oppo. But then with that said, it's finally time for zoom at night. We're starting off with the sensor crop. And you know how it is, we gotta zoom in all the way to 500%. And to be entirely honest, this wasn't that difficult of a shot. There's plenty of light, as you can probably tell. But both are kind of struggling with maintaining proper details and reducing artifacting. So it's a little unfortunate. I expected a little bit better, especially from the X100 Ultra, which is known at this point for its sheer detail preservation. It's not really showcasing that quite as well, now is it? And then finally we have 6x. Now, the Oppo really likes to insist that you use it. It gives you a separate toggle even when using night mode. Well, is it really good enough? I'd beg to differ because the X100 Ultra, just like with the daylight shots, it is just better. There's no two ways about it. The X100 Ultra has the best telephoto camera that we have ever had thus far. And so I can just hardly imagine how good the X200 series is gonna be because, man, and don't you worry, I'll get my hands on that soon enough. Once the global release happens, yeah, the camera comparisons are also going to happen. Very much so. But here's the deal. With these two phones, I think the Find X7 Ultra is good. It has its problems, and so does the X100 Ultra. Now, here's the thing. Both of these finally have had their successors come up, and we'll get our hands on them soon enough. The Oppo obviously comes in a little bit sooner. I'll have the X200 Pro probably by January at the latest. And man, I can't even wait to make those comparisons. In this particular case, I'd say, yeah, the X100 Ultra, especially with the new updates and whatnot, it does seem to have gone up in the inconsistency side of things, which should be the opposite, but it's not, which makes no sense, but that's the way it is. But yeah, I think they're great phones, but I'm more than certain that we have much better stuff in the horizon. So with that said, I do hope you guys enjoyed, found this helpful, and well, I'll see you guys soon enough with many more to come. Cheers!